I believe we are ready to go. And so, first of all, let me welcome all of you to this webinar on Promise-Driven Life. And I want to thank you very much for joining us. I think you'll find this not only informational, but also inspirational and hopefully motivational. Let me begin by saying that we encourage your questions. We'll be with you over the next 45 to 50 minutes or so. So we encourage your questions. You have a mechanism for providing them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And those that we do not get to, we'll do our best to get an email answer out to you as soon as possible. And hopefully we'll be joining each other again in the future with another webinar, perhaps on a different aspect of this subject. First, a little bit about my background. I happen to be a physician who is also a minister and a pastor. So that my passion in life is the intersection between science and spirituality. It's the intersection between medicine and ministry. I'm interested in how does the human being maximize his or her human potential? How do we get the most out of our human condition? That's my passion in life. How do I help others get the maximum potential that resides in them out of them, such that the rest of the world is benefited by what has been stored in them. So the foundation of what I practice and try to preach is the fact that the human being is spirit, mind, and body. Not just one or the other. We're not just bodies, we're not just minds, and certainly we're not just spirits. In this realm, we are spirit, mind, and body. And unfortunately, too often, the focus of this society tends to be one or the other. For example, in medicine, where I was originally trained, the emphasis tends to be on the body or on the mind, and for the most part, on the body. And so that we know a lot about getting the body fixed up, getting the body well, getting the body healed, but we don't pay much attention to the spiritual component of the human being. And in fact, we know that the spiritual component of the human being is in fact the strongest part of the human condition. We know, for example, that when put in a hard place, when trapped in difficult circumstances, human beings can do things that they never imagined that they could do. They will find themselves doing things and accepting challenges and facing difficulties that they had never imagined, and certainly they would never have planned to do, like somebody jumping off of a railroad platform and placing their body on top of another person who has fallen off to cover them from an oncoming train. I mean, nobody thinks about that. Nobody plans on those things. And how do we do these things when the time comes? So that we know that there is a third aspect to us called our spirit. We are spiritual beings, in fact, having physical and mental experiences. Our true essence is our spirit. That is our true essence. Our spirit lives in this body, and we have a mind that kind of governs where the body goes and how strong, oftentimes how strong the spirit is. So I try to bring these three things together through my professional background in both medicine and in ministry. I try to help medical professional institutions involve the spiritual component more, and as a pastor, I try to get our people who are totally concerned and involved and interested in their spiritual well-being. I try to get them to see that it's important that you take care of your bodies also, because our bodies are a gift from the same God that gave us the spirit. That same God gave us these bodies. And so it's important to take care of both. It's important to take care of our spirit. It's important to take care of our bodies. It's important to take care of our minds. And doing such, we will maximize the human potential. And that brings me to the issue of promise-driven life. Now, many of us are very familiar with the fact that a book was written a few years back called Purpose-Driven Life. Wonderful book, wonderful content, and had a magnificent impact on large numbers of people around the world. And it addressed the question, why on earth am I here? Why on earth am I here? It's a basic question, a fundamental question, a question that all of us would want to know. Why on earth am I here? Why am I here and not somebody else? Why is it that the 1 out of 300 million sperm that fertilized the egg that produced me, why was I produced and not another human being? And so that basic question of purpose is responded to by the book called Purpose-Driven Life, written by Rick Warren. Now I submit, and in my book, which is called From Purpose to Promise-Driven Life, I just happen to have a copy here of it. How about that? I submit that purpose is important, and it's fundamental, and it's basic, and it gives you meaning in life. It helps you to understand why you're here. It gives you fulfillment, if you will, to know why on earth I am here, why me and why not somebody else. Now, and we find our purpose by going after it. Generally speaking, people uncover their purpose by pursuing it. We pursue our purpose in an effort to be clear about what it is. And we do that through various mechanisms. You know, we talk to our parents, we talk to our elders, we talk to people who knew us when, and we put together a picture of the things that we're good at, the things that we feel comfortable doing, the things that we have an impact on, and the things that give us fulfillment, if you will. And we, through the process of searching and pursuing and searching and pursuing and talking and conversing with people who know us well and people who perhaps only know us from a work perspective or from a play perspective, we can piece together a picture. We can piece together a picture that will uncover for us our purpose if we go on that journey and by design pursue it. And by definition, we have to pursue our purpose. By definition, we have to go after it. Now, that's good, that's important, that's helpful, and that brings meaning to life. But purpose is different from promise. Purpose is here. Promise is here. Purpose here, promise here. Purpose here, promise here. Promise is higher than purpose. Promise is greater than purpose. Promise is bigger than purpose. One fundamental thing that will help you appreciate the difference and the distinction between purpose and promise is purpose is all about yourself and why on earth you are here. Promise is other-centered, and it answers the question, what difference are you here to make? What difference are you here to make for others? That's promise. That's promise. Purpose is here. Why on earth am I here? Promise is higher than that. Promise is here. What difference am I here to make for others? Now, these two things come together in this fashion. And the reason living a promise-driven life is so important is the thing that brings these two together. Without promise-driven people, fewer people will have the opportunity to achieve their purpose. You see? And that's why promise-driven people are so important. In fact, promise-driven people, they shift the paradigm. Promise-driven people stretch the envelope. Promise-driven people go beyond the established borders. Promise-driven people challenge conventional wisdom. Promise-driven people say, well, okay, so we've always done it this way, but why can't we do it another way? Or is there another way to do it? Or let's make another way to do it, because if we do it another way, perhaps we can serve more people. So, if we boil this down to its fundamental essence, we can see that purpose-driven people are essentially, or being purpose-driven is essentially being all about you. You see, it's good, it's meaningful, it's helpful, but the focus of it is you and yourself. Whereas being promise-driven, the focus of being promise-driven is others, and serving others, and making a difference for others. Now, and if you follow this carefully, you'll see that you really have to know your purpose in order to get to your promise. So knowing your purpose comes first, and from there you can go on to achieve your promise. So it's hard to get to your promise if you have not yet found your purpose. And so I urge those of you who are interested in promise, search out your purpose, learn your fundamental reason for being here, uncover that, go on that journey. But understand this: you don't have to search out your promise. You see, you have to go on a journey to search out your purpose. But you don't have to go on a journey to search out your promise, because your promise searches you out. Your promise comes after you. Your promise represents a dream, a vision, an imagination, something that you've always wanted to do, but you never quite seem to get to it because it seems so big. And the reason it's so big is because it's other-centered. It's beyond you. It's bigger than you. Now, it will bless you, and it will bless you mightily, but the fact of the matter is your promise is all about impacting the rest of the world, impacting others, making things better for others, making a difference for others. That's why it's always big. That's why it's always a vision. That's why it's always future oriented. That's why it's always bigger than you, greater than you. And that's also why so many people fail to achieve or even pursue their promise, because when it comes after them in a dream, in their imagination, in some great desire that they've always had, when it comes after you, one of the first things you'll find yourself saying when your promise comes after you is, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can achieve that. That in fact seems impossible to me. That seems too big for me. And in fact, it is too big for you. You're going to need the help of your Creator to do it. You're going to need the help of God to make this happen. You gotta have serious faith to make this happen. And let me give you some live examples of what I'm talking about. For example, Martin Luther King, young, brilliant scholar, graduated from high school age 15. A couple years after that, he was a graduate of college. He went on to study systematic theology at Boston University. He achieved his purpose by being a great preacher and a pastor when he was at the Ebenezer Baptist Church down in Georgia. Purpose achieved. Great orator, great preacher, making a difference in people's lives. But his promise was much bigger than just that, and just Georgia, and just Atlanta, and just being a preacher to a set congregation. His promise was to be a world changer, to impact the entire earth. And along with that comes his life being put in jeopardy, his family being put in jeopardy, his career being put in jeopardy, the sacrifices he had to make, the attempts on his life that occurred over and over again, his house being bombed, his being stabbed in the chest while signing autographs for a book. All of these things could have been avoided had he just stayed, local, and stayed, pursuing his purpose. But his promise kept calling him, and he responded to it. That's why he reshaped history. That's why he shifted the paradigm. And the same thing can be said for people like Harriet Tubman. Look, Harriet Tubman was a slave who was unformally educated. She could not read, she could not write, and she's one of my favorite heroes of all time. She escaped slavery because something bigger was calling her. Something bigger than being a slave was calling her. Now, you would think that she would be satisfied and she would have achieved her purpose by escaping slavery and taking maybe a couple of her family members with her. Case closed, purpose achieved. Now she's free to live her life as a free person. But no, She was not satisfied. And no, she did not stop at fulfilling her purpose. Her promise kept calling her, and her promise was saying to her that not only can and should you be free, but you should help others be free, as many as possible. And at the risk of her life, at the risk of losing her life, or being crippled and maimed and injured, and experiencing the vicissitudes and the challenges of weather and being hunted by dogs and slave hunters, she went back into slavery, where she was already a wanted, quote unquote, criminal, because she escaped herself. She went back some 19 times and helped over 1,000 slaves get free. Now, many of us, I'm sure, if we put ourselves in that situation, we would have been satisfied and happy having achieved the purpose of being free ourselves, rather than following the promise of going back and helping others. And many of the others not only did not like her, but called her names because they considered her to be retarded and slow because of an illness that she had. And some of these were her own family members. And so promise-driven people, they make great sacrifices. Promise-driven people go above and beyond their basic purpose. And here's the ultimate paradox, contradiction, or irony, if you want to call it that. Without promise-driven people, fewer people would be able to achieve even their purpose. Because promise-driven people make it possible for purpose-driven people to achieve their purpose. That's the irony of it. Without promise-driven people, purpose-driven people wouldn't even be able to achieve their purpose. Because in the human condition, oftentimes we are so selfish and self-centered and self-righteous. Somebody's got to take on those challenges to open up windows and open up doors and knock down walls so that others will be freed to achieve what God put them here to achieve. And if you go down the list of promise-driven people, you list names like Sojourner Truth and Fred Turner and Denmark Vesey, and you list names like Mother Teresa. You list names of some of the great people in history who sacrificed. And the ultimate promise-driven person, of course, was Jesus the Christ, who came, didn't have to come, didn't have to do it, didn't have to put himself through any of all of this mess. And yet he did it, gave his very life as a sacrifice, not for himself. He didn't need any of this, but for others. And therein characterizes and capsulizes what being promise-driven is all about. It's all about being other-centered. Now, so now we know, we get a capsule view of the difference between purpose, the fundamental basic reason for us being here, and promise, that thing that searches after us and won't leave us alone until we go after it and make a difference for others. But then there's a third category called problem. Now, unfortunately, too often, the biggest category is that third category, which I don't like to spend a lot of time on because people are so comfortable talking about the problem. But so many people live their lives being driven by problems, going from problem to problem to problem to problem. And the more time you spend on problems, the less time you have left to work on solutions and new additions. The more time you spend working on problems, you may say, well, how can I get to my promise if I don't deal with this problem? Very simply, listen, every promise-driven person who ever lived had to deal with problems. And in fact, if you think about it and you read biography and read history, you will find that every promise-driven person who ever lived generally has more problems and bigger problems than people who live their life being driven by problems. Now that's tweetable right there. But since you're here at the webinar, let's continue. So there's a difference between being problem-driven, which is way down here, purpose-driven, which is here, and promise-driven, which is here. And were it not for the work and the effort and the energy of promise-driven people, many of us would not have the opportunities that we are working in and sitting in and living in right now. That's the beauty of, and that's the call of being promise-driven. And all of us can live promise-driven lives, but because it's so big, it's so challenging, and it involves working for others and serving others and doing for others as opposed to yourself, we oftentimes run from it. We're oftentimes afraid of it. And I submit to you that the more of us who assume this promise-driven perspective and this promise-driven life, you will gain meaning and fulfillment and joy and enthusiasm that will be unmatchable. It will be unlimited, and it will give you all kinds of energy in life. And there's several characteristics of promise-driven people that we will try to cover as we go forward. We're gonna try to maybe look at some, and again, I encourage you to ask some questions.